Good morning, Samoa, and welcome to Star Trek Stranger Worlds Season 2, Episode 5, Charades! If it was Tails, it was gonna be Charades. Well, yes, this is an interesting one, because it went so late, I watched it so late compared to when it came out. I actually knew a decent amount about the episode going in. I knew that it was Spock-centric. I had recently found out it was somewhat of a comedy. I heard that from a headline that was, I think, Screen Rant or someone. Star Trek just pulled off the best comedy episode in the franchise, which is just wholeheartedly untrue. And the more interesting bit is, in Season 1, we had Spock Amok. If you don't know, because it hasn't come up a lot this season, there's an outstanding rule on this channel that we don't talk about Spock. Just trust me, it's better for everybody. Well, sorry, because I'm getting a look from Alex. There's an outstanding rule on this channel that when we review Strange New Worlds, we don't talk about their rendition of Spock, because it's just better for everybody that way.
Okay.
Yep, Alex's approval now. And Strange New Worlds Season 1, I've said before, I think it has a lot of fundamental problems that they've remedied, but probably my biggest critique was their take on Spock, or rather, more broadly, Vulcans, but Spock was pretty much the only one, aside from, Spock Amok. But I really liked Spock Amok. It was a pleasant surprise. It's where we got the I was wrong sticky note, because I was like, that's going to be awful, and it was actually good. And it was somewhat of a comedy. So it was a comedy-centric episode that centered around my least favorite part of the season, that actually ended up being good. Charades is a comedy-centric episode, and Stranger World Season 2, I think it has solved, so far at least, its fundamental problems. But my two kind of biggest things, carryovers from Season 1, that they're not necessarily doubling down on. They're doubling down on one of them. That are not fundamental problems, but I will say at least one of them is fundamentally flawed, and, are very flawed internally, are the relationship between Chapel and Spock, and T'Pring, and that whole kind of underlying plot line as a whole. Meaning that this is also a comedy-centric episode centering around Spock and my least favorite aspects of the season. So, how does it line up? They'll start. I swear my little show and hide buttons here have gotten swapped because I keep hitting the wrong one. It's an interesting one. We'll start off by saying I think there's a lot of good things in this episode I liked, especially this early bit. There were plenty of things up this episode that gave me a chuckle, gave me a bit of a laugh. I liked the kind of little scene of Pike trying to teach the Vulcans charades. I wish we gotten more, but I feel like it probably wouldn't work, which is why we didn't get more. I like just kind of a lot of the little scenes of Spock going about his day, and also the kind of human Spock going about his day. I think there's a lot of interesting things you can explore, and I think they do explore a fair amount of them. Basically, having Spock be, for all intents and purposes, a human Vulcan rather than a Vulcan human. I might have got those backwards, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah, there were a lot of goods. I'm going to remember a lot. Oh, the whole thing with Kirk. I liked both of them. Both the scenes of Kirk where he was controlled, and then just the crazy, don't test me, Kirk, as they're, bringing him back. There were a lot of good comedy bits in this episode. There were also a lot of good comedy, non-comedy bits, sorry. Acknowledging the contradictions that Stranger Worlds has set up with the Spock and T'Pring marriage. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, I like that this episode is kind of setting up more reasons, and we're leading into a T'Pring that we know is eventually going to leave Spock for somebody else. They actually did a lot of other things. I was really happy, like, in the first part of this episode, I was wondering if they might actually pull it off and justify a Spock becoming the one we see in TOS. Still taking a massive dump on the finale of season 2 is he's like sitting there in tears swearing to his sister he'll never see again that he's going to embrace his human side, but I'm not gonna complain. No, but yeah, I felt the justification of why he might start rejecting emotion going hard on. You can see the benefits for it. He felt more like the Spock I know. There really was a lot of good. But there are also some things I couldn't really get past. Like, I will say this, I think I'd call this a serviceable episode. That's the rating I'd give it, is serviceable. It's actually an interesting one because I spent basically the whole hour. Well, that's not true. Where does the accident actually happen? Here we go. I spent about the last 50 minutes really disagreeing with how they do the premise of, like, Spock is now human and how he's dealing with it. And then, as I was walking away, kind of thinking how I would articulate that, getting ready for the stream, I was like, you know what, actually? There are like ways I can directly relate to where you might be able to make it work more. I think this is going to be an episode that has a lot. That's not true because most people seem to love Ethan Peck's Spock for baffling reasons. I think it's going to be one of those episodes where there's a fair amount of variation in how people rate it, because the concept inherently is built on a lot of kind of assumptions and how you think something would work, how you think this would go about. Kind of the whole premise relies on the changes that happen when Spock becomes a half-human, half-Vulcan into a full-on human. There is no other fully sentient species that we could just be like, hey, what's the difference between a human brain and a Vulcan brain? Like, we can kind of look at other animals, but, you know, we can tell that a lobster doesn't feel pain using the same mechanisms we do, but we have no way of objectively telling whether or not a lobster feels pain the way we do. You know, it's safe to say there are some variations just with the different brain structures, different neurotransmitters, whatever. But I'm getting into the arguments before the premise. This episode almost seems to contradict itself, because the whole thing is Spock is a Vulcan. He has very intense emotions as a Vulcan, as a half-human, half-Vulcan. Well, no, as a Vulcan, he has very intense emotions. As a half-human, he finds it harder to control his emotions as well. But this is what Vulcans do.
Relatable.
They have intense emotions, far more intense than humans, and they have techniques to control them.
Relatable.
But then, you know what, Alex is... You might want to plug your ears. It's a one-off. Then, when Spock becomes human for this episode, don't worry about it. Yeah, you're giving me a look. A thing happened.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry. You want to see Spock without his ears?
No.
Here you go. No, that's his mom.
That's a woman.
There you go.
It's just him in a beanie again.
Oh my god, I've realized the joke. Because in TOS, he would constantly beam down to planets with humans, and he'd wear a beanie to hide his ears. This is Spock wearing a beanie to hide his human ears. I've realized the joke.
Just from me going, he's just wearing a beanie again.
No, it just clicked seeing him. But here we go. I'll find a picture for you. Well, actually, a few seconds after this. There you go.
He looks naked.
He does. He'd look weird, but he also changes hair. Yeah, then this episode, Spock becomes a human, And the justification Spock gives is that he is feeling intense emotions, more intense than usual, and it's difficult to control them. That's...
Autism.
Well, no, that's what he's done already. He already feels intense emotions and suppresses them. The reason I'm not going to spend the next 20 minutes ripping to shreds the fact that he said intense is because at the end of the episode, he explained how Vulcans have emotions that are far more intense than humans. The episode is... But, I'm willing to accept that maybe human emotions are just different. Maybe there's a different kind of strength in them, and he's finding it harder to control those. But it seems very odd that the episode never acknowledges that this is what Vulcans do. Well, no, it feels weird that the episode does acknowledge that Vulcans have intense emotions and they control them. But the premise of the episode is that Spock is having intense emotions and he is woefully horrific at controlling it, to the point that he's about to rip, his crew member to shreds for not cleaning up his mess. Which is, a little bit more extreme than, I don't know, puberty.
I feel like that's reasonable.
When I say mess, he had a plate and cup that were empty because he just finished eating on the table. That was the mess.
I feel that's relatable.
No, but, he was eating at that table. It was in a conference. When he was gonna leave the conference, he was gonna pick them up and throw them away. Like you do.
Valid.
But my point is, you could say, well, he's not got a Vulcan brain anymore, so he can't use those things. But why? There's nothing I can think of in previous episodes that say that this is, the Vulcan ability to suppress is unique to Vulcans. And in fact, there's countless examples I can think of that suggest otherwise. Anytime anybody is having some sort of emotional problem in a series with a Vulcan, the Vulcan goes, I can try and teach you some Vulcan techniques for suppressing that, and they're all like, thank you, Spock, they help. Thank you, Tuvok, thank you, T'Pol, they help. I don't, even if he can't fully suppress them, because they're a different kind of emotion, whatever, it's a different brain chemistry, he is going through a lot, they're surely less intense. Well, even if they're too different to kind of use the same techniques, he should be better than we see. And in fact, he is. Because for this early part of the episode, he is so comically hopeless at his emotions, it is unbelievable, and everybody can see through it instantly. They don't instantly go, oh my god, Spock is suddenly human, because that would be a ludicrous assumption to jump to. But they instantly go, Spock is something wrong because something is clearly wrong. But then, the moment the actual ceremony starts, after a scene where they talk about how they're not going to be able to do it because it's impossible, he is flawless at it, because the plot needs him to be. It just didn't really do it for me. But stepping back a sec, the thing about controlling his emotions, maybe it's something about... yes, that is the frame I'm going to make you stare at. Maybe it's something about his Vulcan brain that gives him an advantage to disabling emotions. And as I was going, I couldn't just accept that, how I imagine seeing them portrayed, how I see that the Vulcan tricks are transferable across species. I was like, hang on. That's what I do. For those of you who don't know, I'm autistic, which means my brain is wired in somehow differently, and that my emotions are incredibly intense. That is the cause of autism. But what that means is that the brain will suppress them. To varying extents, it's going to depend. But at the extreme end, the incredibly extreme end, it's not conscious, I can't control it, but it's like a snap, gone, they're gone now, I don't have the emotions, that, but that is something only my brain can do, because not only my brain, but my brain can only do because it's autistic, and that's not something other people can do. And in fact, it is somewhat controllable. Like, if I want to, I'm a lot worse at it now because I've intentionally tried to lose the skill. But I could just bury them or suppress them if need be. And that is because of the way my brain is structured. If we say that the Vulcan mind, it's somewhat analogous, acknowledging this episode has the quote, "I hate analogies, the world never really works like that," it's entirely possible that there is some element of Vulcan brains that Spock has lost that makes it harder for him to do his job. Similar to, I suppose, when Counselor Troy lost her telepathic abilities for an episode, she became a worse counselor because she was so used to leaning on the crutch of, I guess the advantage, the crutch is a bit hard, of her telepathic abilities. And, like, yeah, she could become a great counselor again, but not overnight. And so it might be interesting to watch this episode again with that in mind, but even then, I think the degree to which she is so comically incompetent, I don't think it works for me from what I've seen about Vulcan emotional suppressant, and I don't think it works for me just because of the internal inconsistency, because he's either only this incompetent because the episode wants to be a comedy, and then as soon as it needs him to be competent, he just stops, or well, the opposite, basically. He actually is that bad, but he suddenly magically gets good after people failing him to teach him how to be good at suppressing his emotions because the episode needs him to be good all of a sudden. So it kind of ended up being serviceable, where, yeah, there's plenty of, stuff I liked in it, but there's also a lot of things I didn't. Another one is, the aliens leave a little dial with instructions on how to contact them. Well, I guess that makes sense, because it is possible to file a complaint. But, like, the first thing they say is no further contact is necessary. Well, then why'd you leave the dial? Like, they did ask if you wanted to form a complaint, so I guess, I'll give them that. There was a reason, but it was kind of buried behind the constant insistence of, you literally have no reason to contact us. We don't want you to contact us. Please stop contacting us. Stop. I'm hanging up now. Bye. That you kind of wonder, why did you actually leave the dial with instructions in the first place? But no, we've justified that. So then, the such obvious solution of just going back and asking in person, I kind of forgot that they hadn't tried it already, because it seems so obvious that you would. To the point that when Nurse Chapel brings it up, I'm like, oh yeah, I was wondering why they didn't just go do that, and I forgot they hadn't. And she seems so insistent that the captain's gonna say no, like she goes behind his back, but like, why would the captain say no? If they don't do this, Spock's gonna die in like a few hours. And he has volunteers, so why wouldn't he say yes? I mean, it feels like so the middle of the episode can happen. And I guess you couldn't have them stuck in the wormhole with negotiations because you need Nurse Chapel on the ship. Like, it felt like it tried to be a comedy, and so it didn't pay as much attention to the plot things, which is alright. I mean, I'm sure Lower Decks will do that, where it doesn't pay too much attention. Veritas, it doesn't really pay too much attention to why would the party look like an interrogation chamber, and why would the crew, the senior officers never voice up and say, hey, this isn't an interrogation, this is a party. But I don't think it can get away with it because it's not good enough of a comedy, because, like, the half of the episode isn't comedy. The whole ceremony isn't played off as a comedy. And this whole end bit where we're exploring Nurse Chapel's feelings for Spock and vice versa, that's not a comedy. So now suddenly the plot, the setup kind of matters. Speaking of plot and setup, so there's a moon inside the Vulcan system with an ancient civilization and a massive energy anomaly that they've just not investigated for several centuries. Now, it's possible they maybe didn't find it, but when did Vulcans get warp drive? Like our Middle Ages? It's, it seems very strange. Like, they could have written it to the energy anomaly just suddenly opened up. Or, it was near Vulcan, or T'Pring and the family happened to be in another system. What? My chat just spat hearts at me. Did someone do that? I've never seen that before. I don't even know how to do that. That distracted me. But, yeah, it was just, it was enough that was weird. Like, individually, none of this really breaks the episode, but it felt weird that you could just say, like, oh yeah, there's an ancient civilization in the Vulcan system that we never hear of again, and also the Vulcans are just never really investigated in the past, like, 1,000 years that they've had warp. You did it. Thank you, Del. I've never seen that before. Like, that feels really big to just drop on us that, yeah, the Vulcan system has an ancient civilization. Maybe there was some new, like, scanning technology that, they just got, so now we can send a new expedition. Fine, like, there are reasons. It just... when you start thinking about it, you realize that it's there because the episode needs the Enterprise to be in the Vulcan system, so that's why it's there. Like, it's serviceable. There was a lot of good. Watching it, I liked a lot of individual scenes. There were plenty of jokes that got me. There were plenty of acknowledgments that were nice. They remembered that humans smell bad to Vulcans. There was a lot I did like. I like, first contact stories. This wasn't much of one, sure, but yeah, it was serviceable. It was a lot of middling. Some stuff I liked, some stuff I didn't. It also felt kind of weird. I liked at the end the kind of comeuppance Spock gave, where he's like, a human did do this ceremony. I thought they were going to go a slightly different route, where it seemed here, I almost felt like they'd projected the ending, where I'm like, I see what's going to happen now, where I figured it would fail somehow, that, like, they would discover Spock was human, I don't know, through something, and then there'd be kind of a big scene of, like, you know what, like, that, I don't have to be good enough for you, I don't know, something like that, but then the dad here was going to step in and be like, no, T'Pring is my daughter too, like, I'm stepping in, it's like, T'Pring, you go marry Spock, welcome, you go become a part of the family, because he's very clearly, like Sarek, he's open to the ideas of human integration. He's open to non-Vulcan ideas. He's not as much of a traditionalist. Well, he's not a traditionalist for traditionalist's sake. If the food tastes better with salt, then there's no reason... Tradition is not a good enough reason to not put salt in the food. And so... he seems like he constantly lives his life like, oh yeah, this is a cool thing. Then his wife gives him some side eye, and he's like, oh well, okay, I guess my wife says it's bad, therefore it's bad. And so I thought he was gonna have a moment of standing up and being like, no, you know what, wife, screw you. You're an asshole. Let T'Pring do this. I don't know. But I am happy with the way. I really like that scene at the end. And I have no problems with Vulcans like T'Pring's mom, in the TOS era. Like, we're about a century after Enterprise, where, Vulcan society got, its ego pulled out from under its ass, and, got the true teachings of Sarek, whatever, but a century is like half a Vulcan lifespan. If we put that in human terms, that's 50 years ago. That's 1973. That's the year after my parents were born. Like, you could be the equivalent of a racist grandfather. Or you could just be a Vulcan who leans more towards the ideals of the last generation. Absolutely no problems with that. And I think I've said before, I love what Enterprise did with the Vulcans. But I almost want to say it was bound to happen, because I think Strange New Worlds of every Star Trek handles Vulcans the worst. Therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise that the Vulcan-centric episodes are the worst. Like, it knows what Vulcan should be. We have Spock say, it knows, the little things that, like, they use the nasal suppressants because humans smell bad to them. It knows that female Vulcans have a stronger sense of smell, which is inconsequential, but it's nice to remember. Not many people... I didn't remember it until it was said about the female Vulcans having a stronger sense of smell. I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember that. But the more important things, like, Vulcans do have emotions that are more intense than humans. We just learn to suppress them. It knows that because it's writing it, it's saying that, but it's not putting that into its Vulcan characters, or it seems to be mishandling it or doing it not quite right. Like, where they have Spock say that the emotions he's experienced as a human are more intense than he's used to. Like, those two lines are in the same episode. I can't even understand. In contrast as well to Discovery, which I think its latter two seasons with a Vulcan president and a post-unification Vulcan and Romulus. Well, yes, Vulcan, not Romulus. What do they call that? Navarre. Thank you. Alex is gone, so I can talk about this stuff now. I think that's the best depiction of Vulcan I've ever seen. It's a Vulcan because Vulcan itself understands what it means to be Vulcan. Like, finally, that's the only time we see the society fully get it. And so the writers get it, the society gets it, and I love that Vulcan. I love the Vulcan president. But yeah, I think Stranger World is the worst at handling Vulcan stuff. Dell, I love the Kirkovian plot too. I was mostly upset that it didn't involve a battle with Paul Wesley, Chris Pine, and William Shatner. Yeah, I picked up on that too. Is there anything... I don't know if there's anything I'm missing from that. Because it also could be something Russian or one of those Cyrillic languages. Yes, that's what Russian is. But I was like, really? Kirk? Ovian? I don't know if you can do that. But I like their names are like yellow and blue. Which is fascinating for like an extra dimensional species. Like, you have yellow and blue, or are they it was interesting. These cave walls, we'll call it a cave, had yellow, blue, and red. I don't know if you noticed, but when Blue was talking to them, it was only yellow and red. And then when Blue kind of goes away and they're like, can I speak with Yellow? You see the blue come back into the cave walls, almost suggesting that, like, somehow these lights in the cave actually are the beings that they're talking to. I like those little touches. I did like for the Vulcans of this era, especially, I guess, Vulcan institutions, which are probably going to be much slower to change than Vulcan society. Just looking at how humanity works. They're still a bit stuck up and enterprisey, and they're like, yeah, we're just... take this. Like, you're not the end-all, be-all. Like, God, I love Vulcans. I really want to... I need a lot of time. I really want to do that video on just, like, here's the totality of Vulcan existence across the millennium we have of them, and why it's amazing. And why it's accidentally autism. Which is the other reason I'm really harsh on Vulcans in Strange New Worlds, is that they are the perfect autism analogy in every way, in the meta sense, in the... I literally... It's hard for me to articulate because it's so big how amazing they are. And then getting it wrong feels like you are portraying autism wrong. Which is a little unfair because it is something that... Vulcans predate autism, and that's something that's kind of being put on the show, like, from the outside. But at the same time, in a modern production, I think you should be aware of that connection, because I think the Vulcan and autism connection has existed for as long as autism, probably predates autism. And more broadly, Vulcans and neurodivergency, especially Spock and neurodivergency. Spock being half human, feeling like an outsider in his own culture almost, is something that a lot of people relate to. So I feel you should know how careful it is to touch that. Because nowadays you know that association does exist, and you should know how important it is to some people. I don't think it's particularly important to me, because part of the reasons Vulcans are so good as an autism analogy is how misunderstood they are as not just pop culture, but in the franchise somewhat. It's getting a lot better with modern Star Trek, that we have more and more Vulcans just actually articulating what Vulcans are, having the super intense emotions that they suppress, and having Navarre Vulcans especially. But it's why I'm always so hard on that one. Like, if you messed up Andorian culture, Telluride culture, I wouldn't be as fussy, but Vulcans are arguably the most important species outside of humanity in Star Trek. Let's see, I don't know if I have too much else to say about this episode, honestly. But I mean, yeah, it was serviceable. I am happy that this, maybe along with the first episode, are like the bottom line of the season so far, because neither of them are bad. That's right, though. The downside of the first episode is it just spends like 20 minutes on a silent fight scene. A good fight scene, but 20 minutes. So if those are our bottom line, I'm gonna be very happy, because the worst episodes are serviceable. But yeah, I'm looking now. This was new to this episode, right? The intro sequence had this bit. I probably really can't stream the intro. I have to be careful about that. But where the meteorites bounce off the hull. I swear that was new to this episode, after the Lotus Eater one. But yeah, I'm just gonna do a quick scan. We might wrap it up early. Why has it got a delta on the beanie? That's just a little too much. You don't have to put the delta on everything. Well, then again, I guess Spock wouldn't be beaming down to alien planets with a Starfleet delta beanie, so whatever. Oh, this thing with the pop bothered me as well, because I get what it's trying to do, but, like, even accepting that Spock would be able to do this ceremony, he's gonna destroy his hands. I used to work grill at McDonald's. Like, your hands are gonna go red very fast, and they're gonna be unusable for the rest of the evening. But, like, the next scene, he's just holding a rope, and it kind of acts like after he does the thing, he's bad for a few minutes, but then he's completely fine. Like, even if he can hide his pain, surely other people would notice, hey, Spock, why are your hands the color of the engineer's uniform? Like, it were a lot of things that didn't really seem thought through, to the point where, like, the plot wasn't the important thing in this episode, but the issues seem so glaring, it's hard not to think about them. Del again, how do you feel about the scenes in this episode where Spock was still being awkward, like laughing too long and loud, when the context of neurodiversity? In the context of neurodiversity, I don't see a need to apply that context. I never would have made the connection in the first place. The episode seemed to be trying to make a puberty connection, which my puberty does not sound like any depiction of puberty I have ever heard. It felt a weird angle to go. Like, were we saying the aliens gave Spock a teenage mentality? I don't... Like, that felt really weird to me. The extents to when she goes, like, as much as it was kind of funny to see just the overdone, like, he has to be dragged away Otherwise, he's gonna rip Kirk's to shreds for an even more mundane, quote-unquote, mess than the first time. Like, that's not... You don't know how to control your impulses. That is actually something you need to go to sickbay for and, like, analyze. That's not... That crosses a line. And so it felt, again, like they just went too far for me to really be believable. I mean, laughing too long. I mean, fine. I mean, you know, he really liked that joke. That to me, that doesn't seem like a neurodivergent thing. That can just happen if he really loved. It seemed like it can't have been that good. Like, surely the punchline, I am human after all, from the neck up, whatever the setup to that, surely the line from the neck up had to have been broadcast from a mile away, but whatever. What was the other thing he did? Oh, yeah, smelling the food. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I'm sure... I actually brought this up, didn't I? It must be hard to film if Pike is actually cooking, because that set must smell amazing. But yeah, I was kind of annoyed that it was bacon, because I feel like... I don't know, I get unreasonably, like, kind of irritated whenever a love for bacon comes up, because it always feels like someone going, the internet loves bacon, let's do bacon, because everyone loves bacon. And as someone who doesn't really care for bacon too much, because people tend to burn it, I get annoyed, right? People knew I liked the internet and nerdy things as a kid, so they always assumed I liked bacon because everyone loves bacon. I get a bit annoyed. It's unreasonable, but yeah, it kind of detracted from the scene at an extremely personal level. So, yeah, I mean, that... It's interesting, because as much as I say I think the Vulcans are the perfect autism analogy, I never really watch shows and see, like, the Vulcan or even, like, Adira, who's the non-binary representation, or any other character I might relate to that I can think of, and go, like, yes, this is me, or it's like, I'm so glad I see me in these characters. I have literally never done that. I don't... It relates to a broader thing, I think. When people talk about relatability in characters, I genuinely can't understand the concept and, like, how I see it used, or even that relatability would increase the enjoyment of a character, or how you're supposed to meet it. Like, the one that gets me is Dr. Pulaski. The people who love Pulaski tend to love her because they think she's very relatable, and they think that she is relatable in a way that none of the other TNG characters are, because the other TNG characters are quote-unquote perfect people. You know, they always kind of do the right things, have the right emotions. I'm just going to accept the premise that the other TNG people are perfect, because it's beside the point. But to me, I've always been like, okay, but, like, if you see yourself more in Dr. Pulaski, sure, like, do you think you have to work on yourself? It's weird, because to me it's like, if you're saying these other people are perfect, and you're more like the non-perfect person, then surely you want to be more like the perfect people, because the perfect people are by definition better people. It's like a weird... And I don't know, I've just never gotten it. And I also don't think Dr. Pulaski is as relatable as I understand the concept as some of the other people. Not that I think they are perfect, nor I am perfect because of it, but it's like, it's a very hard... I don't really understand the concept of relatability in television. And I'll see quotes. One of the famous ones is Russell T Davies, the guy who wrote Doctor Who for the 9th and 10th Doctors, has a very famous quote. I'm going to paraphrase it here because I don't know it exactly, but he was saying if you're a Doctor Who writer, you want to set the story on, like, Earth or an Earth colony, or involve humans somehow, because if, like, the human colony is under attack, people are going to care, but no one's going to care if the Blorps of Blorpton from planet Blorp are going to die, which is something I, like, fundamentally disagree with. And to take it more to some of the problematic things, you'll get real world people where who was the one I heard recently? Ncuti Gadwa, 15th Doctor, said well, no, was it him? It wasn't for Doctor Who. It was for Sex Ed, another show he did. If you don't know, Ncuti Gadwa, the 15th Doctor, is black. And he had producers when he was working on Sex Ed, like very high up, kind of like company people. I don't think it was the people working on the show. Say that audiences wouldn't be able to understand his character because they couldn't relate to a black character, a black man, because presumably they weren't black, the audience. I was like, I genuinely... like, Kira's a Bajoran. Like, Spock's a bad example. Tuvok's a Vulcan. Like, I don't understand relatability as a concept, and so I feel like when I talk about the representation, it's kind of different to how other people might see it. Well, rather, representation of groups that I am. I think it's different to how other people might see it. Dell, to me it felt like a very exaggerated caricature of the media concept of autism. I mean, welcome to how people see Vulcans. No, it could be. I'm probably not the most in touch with how the media sees autism. But yeah, I think a lot of those...
I see autism every day.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things like the laughing too long, Yeah. The one that I thought is that the kind of thing about the crumbs, well, to the point where security officers are dragging him away from, like, ripping his crew member to shreds, felt like a media interpretation, or I don't want to say over-exaggeration of something like OCD, because, I mean, it's a disability. It is debilitating. It's probably hard to over-exaggerate what actual OCD is like at the high end, but... I don't know, at that point now, are we saying that the comedy comes from watching someone who is neurodivergent, or what's the one? I heard a great thing. I'll try and remember it. Is the comedy that someone who is neurodivergent is failing to fit into a society? Because I don't think that was it. I mean...
What's funny about somebody not understanding?
Well, you could argue it is. Social,
awkwardness?
Can be funny, yeah. And I don't think I got that was the intent.
I don't like it at the expense of characters.
You've walked in at a bad thing. It wasn't at the expense of the characters. And, like, there are very good plot reasons that, like, Spock were... I never got that sense, but when you really try and sit back and analyze it or, like, define the comedy, which you should never do, of course, that is kind of what it was. Well, no, because, like, surely the comedy is that someone who is neurotypical is in these situations, because Spock is human at this point. If we're continuing this analogy, remembering that this episode has the quote, "I hate analogies, that's never what it's exactly like," then Spock would have become neurotypical by becoming human. But, the resolution of this episode is Spock, like, sticking out to his future stepmother, being like, "Oh, you think a human could never complete this ritual? Well, I was a human when I completed this ritual." Which I suppose is technically untrue, because he was a Vulcan when he did the mind meld thing, but we're going to let that one slide, because, yes, it's beside the point. Del, 1, doctors are expected to be superhuman, so I don't get that argument at all. Which argument? You might have to tell me which one. 2, I like Pulaski and stuff, I guess. 2, I think all the TNG crew had imperfections. Oh, yeah, I think saying the TNG crew is perfect is an exaggeration.
What made them good was their imperfections.
But,
like Riker wanting to F the light.
I see the point that people who say that, what they're getting at, is that, especially in TNG, the world of the Federation is utopian, and it's kind of solved all their problems. And the people, by growing up in a utopian society, especially the main cast, will gravitate towards the sort of utopian ideal belief, and they find that unrealistic because they live in a non-utopian society, and they are surrounded by people who make the non-utopian decisions. And they personally might think that it's unrealistic to think that everything can be utopian. That's kind of the underlying thing of the TNG cast are all perfect. But yeah, I think they're much more real people than people tend to give them credit for, especially like Riker. Picard's stuck up, but I think Picard's a real person. He's just a stuck up real person. You see him get excited at like archaeology when he's got the little ships in the bottles. We just did that episode.
Have
like,
you ever wanted to look into the ship? No, I did. Shut up, O'Brien.
But I can I can kind of understand it. I guess the other route is that especially when Gene Roddenberry was alive, the Starfleet officers tend not to have interpersonal conflicts, or at least not severe ones. So Pulaski is pretty much the only character who will strongly go against someone else. And often it's Picard, and they like that it adds the conflict to the story. Like, I can understand the argument, even if I don't agree with its wording. But yeah, relatability is a very weird thing to me in TV, because I feel like I don't... Like, a lot of them have become models. There was a YouTuber I watched who had the line, there comes a point in every Trekkie's life when they realize that they must ask the question, what would Picard do? And the quote was, there comes a point in every Trekkie's life when they realize that Star Trek is their religion, and where, like, a Christian might go into a difficult situation and go, what would Jesus do? We look at ourselves and go, what would Picard do? Because Picard is the... I
don't ask myself what Jesus would do. Jesus would put up with a lot of shit.
I said might. But I said, like, Picard, because Picard is the moral guiding compass of the universe, It's like... and it sort of is, like, Picard and a lot of those Starfleet ideals are a great model. And so, in a sense, if I model myself after them, I will see myself in some of them. Or at least those ideals. But... no, I don't think I've ever seen really a character with relatability. You do, Alex, right? Like, you love Data and Spock and stuff because of the relatability, right?
Yeah, I can easily see myself in them.
Yeah.
And other characters that... usually, a lot of times, it's like a character that has... if, like, they're color-coded, the green color-coded one. Because growing up, I could see myself in number 3 from Codename Kids Next Door, because she had her rainbow monkeys and I had my Care Bears. And I could understand her a lot, and I could very much relate to Pidge. Because gender is questionable. If
I think about it more, I can probably come up with a character that's like, yes, I can see this character who I thought was very much like me. I'm drawing a lot of blanks right now. But there have definitely been more situations where I'm like, yeah, I've been in that situation. But I don't ever feel it's really increased my connection to a character. Or even, like, a real person, I think. Like, it's such an interesting... like, it's such a foreign concept to me of relatability.
Remember when we were talking and I told you at Easter my brother said he thought I might have autism? You're like, wait, what do you mean you don't have it?
That definitely wasn't my reaction. I'm pretty sure I was going to start and interject. I was going to be like, actually, you know what? There might be something to it. It was one of those where you went, yeah. Like, if you did, you probably imagined it, and even though you can't see it, I did raise my finger, and the like, actually, it was that, but, yeah, it's an odd concept to me. It's a totally foreign concept to me. Oh, it was a point someone asked, the, over-exaggerations. If I get anything from that, where Spock is being way over the top, it ties back into my feeling I've mentioned a lot that especially in shows and movies from the 60s that I've seen, which is basically just Doctor Who and Star Trek, but also later on, there's often this kind of running theme, an idea that humanity is inherently savage, and people spend essentially everybody spends every waking moment of their life like trying not to be savage and trying to be a civil person, and that comes unnaturally. And in the 60s, it's way over the top. Like, Kirk has this whole speech about try not to kill today. That, like, he flat out says, like, all you have to do is spend every waking moment trying not to murder someone for today, and then do that every day, and that's how you build a society. That is like an existentially terrifying thought that the fact it comes up so often in so places might actually be true. And I brush up against it from some people, like the invasive thoughts about, like, someone bumps into you in the sidewalk, you're like, I'll kill you, is like a thought that pops in your head. That is such an alien foreign concept that I struggle to believe that it's actually true.
I don't think about murder, I just hope they have a bad day.
Even that is like, that I could understand how that could happen, but that's like when you have B'Elanna Torres, who's half Klingon, half human, and she has heightened aggression because we've established Klingons' aggression is very strong. Is like, yeah, that'd be like a particularly aggressive person. It's like, it's such a foreign alien concept to me, and I really don't like it because it is existentially terrifying, and I can't imagine living in a world where that's the case. And I might, and I genuinely have to, like, repress this because it's somewhat traumatic. And no, that's what Spock's overreactions kind of make me think of. What might be detracting from any sort of neurodivergent, I don't know if you want to call it representation, but, yeah, that's what it made me go back to, if anything. But I'm pretty sure that's not what it's saying. Actually, I think that is what it's saying in the scene with Kirk, but not necessarily to that extreme. But I also have to wonder, though, like, that's the 60s. That's what your grandparents tell you about World War I, your parents tell you about World War II, and you're living in the Cold War under constant threat of a nuclear annihilation. Like, I can see how you might come to that conclusion if you're living in the 1960s, but to me, that sort of Star Trek, almost utopianism is more natural. And, like, the always seeing the other point of view is the go-to to me. I'm trying to say this without sounding really pretentious, because...
It's okay to say that you don't understand how people would want to be aggressive sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make you sound pretentious.
It's okay for me to say that it seems like everybody else in the world is a total savage, but I'm the only utopian sensible person. Like,
I don't think that's how you really feel.
I don't think that, but those are also the words that I'm saying if you kind of put it all together.
But that's not your intent.
Yeah.
And with autism...
Hence, I'm trying to say this without sounding really well, like, is it autism? Because you say you understand the idea of the intrusive thoughts and stuff. You get all that.
But autism also acts differently in biological females versus biological males.
But I can't accept the idea that's the idea that the only way to be, like, not inherently savage is to be neurotypical, and I can't accept that for multiple reasons.
I can.
Well, that's live forever now. That's stored here for anyone who's made it this far. I can't accept that because, for one, it's existentially unnerving, at least, and for two, I know I cite slippery slope logical fallacies, but it's not a path I want to start going down, that I am somehow inherently superior because of my genetics. Yeah, no, I'm going to do a
It's not because of your genetics, it's because of your autism.
Which comes from my genetics. I'm going to do a firm walk away from that line of thinking. Oh yeah, going through, we were doing the scene by scenes, weren't we? Yeah, I've talked about T'Pring a lot. She's mostly T'Pring, and I don't like her.
Sorry, I keep cussing. I'm playing Sonic Adventure Battles.
T'Pring might be my least favorite Vulcan in the franchise. Like, is T'Pring worse than Ethan Peck Spock? Because Ethan Peck Spock sometimes works, and I can sometimes see it. T'Pring thinks Vulcans are, like, always fed up with the universe, it seems. Like, T'Pring is one of the most emotional people in the franchise, and she's Vulcan.
Oh, God.
We're calling you Bashir from now on. Yeah, actually, hey, there we go. Bashir's a character I can relate to some things on, because, yeah, he does, I mean, genetic enhancements in autism are different, but yes, there are genetic things that make him different from those around him. He grew up like me, where I've talked before, that's kind of the expectation that you're gonna go on and do big things. In elementary school, there isn't even a constant for what this is in the United States, let alone internationally. But I would go to, it was essentially every weekday, one weekday of the week, you would go to like a different set of classes where you would do like college level work. Sometimes more difficult than the college level work was. In middle school, I did the equivalent for the district I was at. In high school, I was in advanced placement, which is college level work. People would tell me that they thought I was really smart. My peers seemed to judge me as having a higher intelligence than normal. I disagree with their definition of intelligence. But yeah, there are ways I can relate to some of the things Bashir goes through. It's been a while since I have seen Deep Space Nine. But yeah, there you go. There's a decent character that I actually can relate to. I know that was probably meant as a sort of joking jab. But yeah, if anything, that's also what I want to avoid. Because Bashir has kind of the arc at one point with the failed augments, the like augments that went wrong, where he's kind of like finally someone who can understand me. Like, and I think O'Brien goes back in him. He's like, oh, so what? Like, the rest of us are too slow for you? And he's kind of like, well, quite frankly, yes. That's exactly the kind of thing I want to avoid here. But, I remember there was a conversation. There was another kid in my class. We'll call them Zach. That wasn't their name. Is it the one
that wrote the book?
They actually had a Star Trek name. Which is I'm tempted to use. We'll call them Picard. They weren't Picard, but they had a Star Trek name. Where they were crazy smart, but they were one of those people who were crazy smart and put that intelligence into figuring out the exact minimum amount of work to do in order to pass. And I remember in a statistics class, we were doing something together. And I think they were also autistic. I think they told me that. But it was such like a same wavelength when we were talking about a problem. We had done the thing that you sometimes see in the shows where you're genuinely basically just foregone language because we didn't need it. We needed like one or two little words, and then the other would realize what someone was thinking. Be like, oh yeah, I understand that. So like, there are ways I can relate to the thinking differently and then finding someone else who thinks differently. And there are ways I can relate to some of the things how Spock thinks. Through a lot of this episode, I was going, I mean, it seems like such a logical thing to do. They're not doing. This scene with Nurse Chapel, where she's like, Spock, my friend. And they're like, friends are not allowed to give a complaint. Well, the obvious next choice of action is to go, okay, can you give me the list of people who can? Because maybe I'm one of them. Like, I'm Spock's doctor. But no, she didn't do that. She kept doubling down on being a friend. And even when she got her one chance to say something different, she's like, what is Spock to you? What does she say?
Mother of a goat!
Spock's my friend. Then, like, it really got me. And yeah, so I can understand, in TOS, I often agreed with Spock. Every time he'd look at a civilization, he goes, I understand. And then everyone around him goes, what the heck, Spock? You love these, like, Romans keeping slaves, yada? And he's like, no, I understand why they're doing it. And, God, TOS was so bad at that, like, not understanding logic, or, like, even that position. But yeah, I will do that a lot as well, where it's... Oh my god, sorry, I need a drink. Where it's like, yeah, I see why you're doing this. This makes sense. I understand the motivation behind your actions. They're still horribly immoral, and I disagree with them fundamentally. That's a position you can hold. But... yeah, what was our core? Something about relatability, something about eugenics. I think we were talking about genetics making you superior. So let's just move on.
You were talking about autism, how you couldn't relate to characters, and then you were talking about a specific character I don't think I've met yet.
Spock? Oh, T'Pring. Technically, you've met T'Pring, Spock's wife, who didn't marry him in Time Amok. Remember?
No, you were talking about a character you related to.
Oh, Bashir. Yeah. You're a ways away from Bashir. Even in my Deep Space Nine watch through, I don't think Bashir's genetically engineered yet. They haven't invented that. Yeah, I don't think there's too much. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, T'Pring. Is T'Pring the worst Vulcan depiction? I genuinely think she might be. And it's so weird. I know it's not the same people who write Discovery, but, like, Strange New Worlds is probably being written next door to Discovery. And you have the best Vulcan, in the world with the best representation, followed in the worst Vulcan in the world with the worst Vulcan depiction. Like, it's just so weird to me that can exist. But yeah, don't get me wrong, classic Star Trek is no stranger to fundamentally misunderstanding some of its core villains and races. But they generally do a pretty good job understanding what the Vulcans are, even if the characters in the show don't. Don't get me started on the Borg.
The Borg Cube!
Alex has just finally got introduced to the Borg with Q-Who. But they have yet to do any of the other episodes where they start going downhill.
I liked the Borg babies.
The Borg babies. They did like the Borg babies.
I just like babies.
That's true. Alex saw some babies who'd been ripped from their homes, their species genocided, their planets destroyed, and they'd been physically mutilated with implants, just put in little cupboards, and then went, "Aw, babies. I love the babies." But yeah, I think, as I did another drink, we might be wrapping it up. Now, next episode, I did check. It's not Lower Decks, which is good, because my special packages haven't arrived yet. Trek Memory Alpha. Oh yeah, look for it. I've got an idea for the thumbnail of the Lower Decks episode. Whoops. Star Trek Memory Alpha Strange New Worlds. I don't remember what it was. What is Star Trek Memory Alpha Strange New Worlds. There we go. I opened some sort of weird thing on Chrome.
Don't say stuff like that, because one time I'm just gonna yell, "Is that Rule 34?
Lost in translation, which could be interesting. I mean, that suggests some certain thing. I will say, again, episode titles have been going downhill since TOS ended, but Charades really got me. Like, really? You just had to... You mentioned Charades once. Yeah, there's no synopsis. Lost in translation. I don't know. That kind of suggests it could be some first contact thing. There's going to be a misunderstanding. But it's interesting. Oh, and I didn't even talk about this canon destroy. It's like the Star Trek has two... Well, Strange New Worlds, let's set aside the eugenics wars for a second. Stranger Worlds has two kind of actually canon-breaking things. It's Spock and T'Pring, and Spock and Chapel. And this episode had both. Yeah. I've said before, this is my least favorite thing about the show now. It probably more so than T'Pring, because at least T'Pring doesn't come around often. And I knew we were going to explore it, but I wish we weren't. And it's destroying... so much of TOS isn't going to work now. Basically, probably any episode with Nurse Chapel in it doesn't work even more. So, when the actors have just gone on strike with the writers, so... when Paramount collapses as a company in the next 1, 2, maybe 3 years, at least we will know we were saved from the exploration of a relationship with Spock and Nurse Chapel. So that's something, isn't it? Yeah, I might You might want to try and obtain these episodes if you have a way where you still can, because Eilmas went down in a day, and who knows what Paramount's gonna do. It's just gonna take a while for them. But with that note, that pessimistic note,
Shadow saved Rouge from getting blown up. That's a happy note.
What? Oh,
We're in space.
Yep, Alex is... Why is Barbie in your Sonic game?
That's Marie. Do you not know the lore of Shadow the Hedgehog? And how he's technically
it sounds
Dr.
like I'm
Eggman's
about to get a
uncle?
lecture, so in all that, thanks for watching, and I'll